Welcome to Stay Home, Stay Focused. I am Jack Moline. I'm president of Interfaith Alliance, and my very special guest today is Reverend Dr. Ron Sider, who is the founder of Evangelicals for Social Action and distinguished professor of theology, holistic ministry, and public policy. That's a mouthful. At Palmer Theological Seminary in Philadelphia. It's a great honor to have Ron here. He is one of the great thinkers and has earned the status of eminence grise in the field of the intersection of activism and theology. And Ron, before we get into all of that, how are you?
I'm actually quite fine. We live in a Mennonite retirement community, and we're safe. I have our little cottage. We're just staying home and get our groceries on Instacart. So, we're really quite safe.
I know that the constant drumbeat of dealing with the pandemic is reaching you, no matter how safe and secure you are. How do you maintain your focus with all of this noise about staying clean, staying safe, staying distant?
Well, first of all, we try to listen to the scientists. The scientists tell us that if we do social distancing, I think a better word is physical distancing, because we try to stay in touch with family and friends and church members on Zoom and so on. But following that and just staying at home. Everybody in our retirement community is told that we're supposed to stay in and not go out. So we essentially do that, although I have to go to a doctor's appointment a little while later today. But, we've just stayed at home since early March.
Well, I will do my best not to get your blood pressure up before you go to the doctor today. I want to mention, because we're going to get to it eventually, that you have a new book coming out the first of next week entitled The Spiritual Danger of Donald Trump, in which 30 evangelical thinkers write about the president and the nature of his conduct in his presidency in the context of faith, of particularly evangelical Christianity. But before we get to all of that, I think that sometimes my audience from Interfaith Alliance is not real familiar with what evangelical Christianity is. How do you describe evangelicalism to people who consider it to be a synonym for conservative political perspectives?
Well, part of the tragedy, something that I've been fighting pretty much all of my life as an evangelical, is that there is a lot of correlation between theologically conservative evangelicals and right-wing politics. I think that's misguided, but the core of being an evangelical is that we're committed to the gospel. The Greek word evangelium is the gospel, so we're committed to Jesus Christ. We want him to be Lord of our politics, Lord of our life in every way. I would say, as a quick summary, evangelicals believe in historic Christian theology. We believe the Bible is God's special revelation. We believe that a personal living relationship with Christ is important, and we want to tell others about it, not in a nasty kind of, offensive way, but just inviting people to what we believe. That's kind of the core. But there's this tragic connection between evangelicalism and right-wing politics. Now, I think that is misguided. The largest evangelical organization in the country, the National Association of Evangelicals, has its public policy document. It's called For the Health of the Nation, and that says that faithful evangelical political engagement must have a biblically balanced agenda. And the document goes on to talk, yes, about abortion and marriage, but also about racial justice and economic justice and peacemaking and care for creation. And that whole agenda is what I think a biblically balanced agenda deals with.
So is that why you were the founder of Evangelicals for Social Action?
Well, way back in 1972, I actually organized Evangelicals for McGovern. That was a strange thing. The next year, we did the Chicago Declaration of Evangelical Social Concern, and that led to ESA. And we were calling evangelicals to be much more engaged. on questions of economic justice and racial justice and so on, equality of men and women. And so, yes, I wanted to plead with the evangelical community, with whom I largely agreed theologically, to get more engaged on issues of social justice. And that's what ESA was trying to do for the 40 years that I led it. I'm now president emeritus.
I've sat in rooms with you, with colleagues of mine in the rabbinate and colleagues of yours among progressive evangelicals, and we've talked about this a lot. It is I won't say astonishing because nothing surprises me anymore, but it is remarkable how much the agenda of the Jewish community, in all its fluctuations, has in common with the agenda of the branch of evangelical Christianity from which you have emerged. We really have, except for a couple of issues you've already mentioned, a social agenda that is so similar. I won't call it identical, but it's pretty close.
After all, it's your prophets who have taught us. I mean, Amos is one of my favorite biblical writers, and Isaiah. The biblical prophets are simply fantastic in terms of demanding that justice for the poor is central to who God is.
And I've just been talking to somebody about a documentary that is coming out soon about Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, and his magnum opus was about the prophets. And he makes the point over and over again, what you've just said, that the prophets don't predict what's going to happen to us in the future. They call us to take seriously the Word of God and to act on it, especially on behalf of those who are disadvantaged in society. So, given that we have all of this in common, Ron, does theology matter in public policy?
Well, if you believe, as all Christians claim to believe, that Jesus Christ is Lord, that means he's supposed to be Lord of all of your life. That means your sexual life, your economic life, the way you care for creation, and it certainly includes politics. I mean, politics is important. It shapes the lives, it affects the lives, in the case of the American president, of billions of people around the world, because this country is so powerful. So if you think that what the prophets tell us about justice is not just a personal, private hunch, but something that the Lord of the universe, the God that Christians and Jews worship, is indeed God, then you can't just say, well, forget about him. We have to try to live that way.
We agree again on that emphasis, but obviously you and I have a different take on how that God is to be heard and how that God is to be worshipped. And we find ourselves in coalition on important social issues with people who either don't subscribe to the biblical traditions to which you and I adhere, or who claim no attachment to faith at all. Does that make a difference?
I think that's not a problem at all. I mean, obviously, I think theological issues are important, and in a particular circumstance, we can talk about those. But in terms of shaping the politics of our country, I want to work with anybody of goodwill. Christians, Jews, Muslims, atheists, agnostics, people that I disagree with on other kinds of things. But if we agree that we need to take care of this creation because global warming is going to be devastating, obviously we work together on that. We work together on economic justice. All my life, I've been doing that kind of partnership, and working with prominent Jewish leaders has been one joy of that.
I want to make clear to our viewers and listeners that I know all of this stuff because I've known Ron for a long time. But it's important, I think, for people who identify with a leftward tilt to American politics to understand that allies in the faith community come from all different quarters, and that we are not indeed divided by party affiliation. Tell me, Tell me a little bit about your new book.
Well, the title is The Spiritual Danger of Donald Trump. I'm not sure if you can
You
give me
just happen to
the
have one handy.
just happen to. And the subtitle says 30 Evangelical Christians on Justice, Truth, and Moral Integrity. We're Republicans, Democrats, Independents, the authors of the book, the different chapter writers, but we're all agreed that we think Jesus should be Lord of our politics, and that should, in fact, lead us to a concern with racial justice and economic justice and care for creation. And we find the current president just appalling. He lies constantly. His personal sexual life is absolutely horrible. He clearly appeals to racism in his statements. And what he's done in terms of the environment is just absolutely devastating. You know, I could go on and on and on, but we talk about that in the book and say, can you really be an evangelical Christian? Can you really believe what the Bible says about personal integrity and justice and so on, and not be appalled with what this man is doing?
It is a comprehensive approach to the president's conduct and the evidence of his character, with each of these 30 authors taking a slightly different perspective on how to evaluate his record in office and his personal record that has been very public. You know, we Jews have inside and outside conversations, Ron. Our inside conversations use a set of values that are easily misinterpreted or misunderstood by people who have not been part of the Jewish conversation within our community. And then when we bring those conversations outside, our concern is always that people will focus on our conclusions rather than our process. This book, and I've read it, it's great, everyone should read it. This book feels like one of those inside conversations. What was the impetus in bringing it to the outside, to the public?
Well, the fact is that 81% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump in 2016. And the writers of this book find that appalling in terms of biblical norms and standards. And so we want to talk to that white evangelical community. Obviously, you know, this election this fall will be decided by lots and lots of different people, but we're talking about that white evangelical community, especially what I call the centrist white evangelical community. And we're wanting to say, does it really fit with your own values, with biblical standards?
I've seen some of the people who have offered endorsements on this as people who really represent the gamut of Christian practice and Christian faith within that evangelical community. It's really very, very impressive who has endorsed this. Have you had in these early preview days any kind of response from what as Jews we call Amcha, the people?
Actually, I haven't had any specific attacks yet. I won't be astonished if that happens, but nothing striking yet. I'm supposed to be on a very conservative radio show with someone who is a strong Trump supporter, so I'll find that an interesting occasion in a little while.
You can plug the show and the broadcaster.
I've been in this kind of dialogue for a long time. I rather enjoy it, and I respect people who disagree with me. I pray regularly for the visible evangelical Trump supporters, praying that they will listen to the scriptures, and my hope is that they will act differently, but I certainly want to pray for them.
Good for you. You're a person, as I think everybody has noticed even in this brief conversation, you're a person of strong and comprehensive faith. It's woven into the very fiber of your being. How does that interact with the First Amendment to the Constitution? Your sense that Jesus should be the Lord of everything that you do, and by extension, lead you to promote certain policies for this country. How does that interact with your perception of the Establishment Clause and the Free Exercise Clause in the Constitution?
Well, I take the First Amendment very, very seriously. I think, in fact, one can make a very good um, biblical argument for religious freedom. I think that the God I believe in doesn't simply coerce people. I think God gives us freedom to choose, and therefore the First Amendment fits perfectly with that. I wish everybody agreed with me, but I respect people who vigorously disagree. I want to defend their rights. I'm glad I have the religious and political freedom to edit a book like The Spiritual Danger of Donald Trump, but I defend the right of Ralph Reed to write a book saying why Christians ought to vote for Donald Trump.
Well, that's a great explanation. It's a great explanation. Ron, before we go, I always like to ask my guests if they can offer something to the people who are at home watching and listening to this, something that will inspire and engage them to keep focused on something other than washing their hands and keeping their family safe. What do you commend to people?
Well, I actually wrote a blog. I do a regular blog on the deepest spiritual, theological things for me in this pandemic. Obviously, that's going to be different with people of different religious views, but I would encourage everybody to go deeper in their own religious beliefs and ask, what that set of beliefs gives them in terms of hope and fortitude.
It's important to have, if not a guide, at least an example if you're going to do that. So this would be a good time to tell people where they could find that blog.
Yeah, my blog is ronsiderblog.substack.com. ronsiderblog.substack. That's substack.com, and it's free. So I'd love to have you join.
Even better, even better. And you should all remember that though his name sounds like it's made from apples, it's spelled with an S. It's Ronsider.
Ronsider.
Right. Terrific. Ron, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today and to discuss your new book, The Spiritual Danger of Donald Trump, and your blog, and your long service to this country through your faith and your activism. And to those of you who are watching and listening, stay home and stay safe.
Thanks, Jack.